Hi, this is a quick introduction to how I have approached taking an in-class essay. I've had to write a lot of in-class essays as an English major, usually 3 or 4 every semester. So I've got a lot of practice at this, but it didn't really become a big deal until I was taking a Shakespeare class that I ended up not doing very well in because I didn't like Shakespeare when I was younger, and I had to deal with some illness in my family, and so I missed part of the semester, and everything just went really poorly, and I kind of blew it off. And then I ended up in a position where I realized that I needed to take some drastic action in order to save my grade. I checked the syllabus, and this particular teacher had a policy that if you got the best grade in the class on the final exam, you automatically got an A in the class. So I saw this as a sort of Hail Mary moment, and I developed this approach to taking in-class essays, and it worked out really well for me. So I'm just going to share this method with you in case you ever find yourself in a position in the future where you need to take an in-class essay. So first thing, in advance, you're going to want to make sure that you study. Duh, right? But if you know that an in-class essay is coming, sometimes the teacher will tell you in advance what the test questions might include. And if that professor does that, you definitely want to take note of how you might answer that question in advance. The more you can do in advance, the easier it's going to be on the day. In particular, pay attention to words that are hard to spell. I had the good fortune of doing a lot of study with teachers who wanted me to be able to spell this word. This is the name of one of my favorite philosophers now, but I did definitely have to memorize that one, Nietzsche. And you might want to memorize a quote or some dates to become, especially impressive. And memorizing a quote, even if it's a short one, will give you some automatic words that you know right away. Plus, you get some mileage out of discussing a quote. So definitely consider memorizing a quote if you know you're going to have to take an in-class essay. On test day, first thing up, examine the entire test. See what kinds of formats. Sometimes a teacher will have like 2 big essay questions, so that's going to be a consideration. Sometimes there'll be a bunch of short answers, or a bunch of multiple choice, or a bunch of fill in the blank questions, and then there'll be just one essay at the end. So think about where you're going to need to spend most of your time. And it's also really helpful to look at the essay questions up front to get an idea of how long the instructor or professor expects the essay portion to be, and also to see what the questions are, because then we're at 3 now. When you do the rest of the test, you might be able to get some ideas from that test itself. If maybe you didn't know how to spell a word, you forgot, but it's in one of the other test questions. Or maybe there'll be some key words in other parts of the test that help you remember things you want to talk about in the essay. So do it in that order. Look at what the questions are going to be. Just like when you did a reading comprehension quiz when you were in elementary school or middle school or high school, and you looked at the questions before you read the story so that you could answer the comprehension questions correctly. Do that with the test, seeing if there's clues that you can recycle into your essay answer. The next step is consider the time constraints. What you should do there is see how much time you have left when you get done with the rest of the test. And you might do that first thinking like, oh, I've got 2 hours. You'll probably naturally do that. I've got 2 hours. I'm going to really hurry through this multiple choice part, and then I'm going to be able to have a lot of time to work on my essay portion, because the essay is usually the hardest, and it's usually worth more points. It just depends on the teacher. So I'm going to say that you used an hour doing a whole bunch of little stuff in the rest of the final or the exam, and you have an hour left. So this is how I generally break it up. It's really important when you consider your time constraints that you kind of know yourself. I know that when I write something, generally it's almost perfect the first time through. So I don't tend to have to spend a lot of time checking my grammar at the end, which is why I've only given myself 5 minutes. This purple time is 5 minutes. But the first step is reread the question. Think about how you could answer it. Make sure you understand what the question is asking, and then you're going to brainstorm for 5 minutes. You're probably really good at that at this point, thinking up, listing, anything you can do, scrape every answer out of your brain, make a rough 5-paragraph outline, and then write the paper, and then spend some time at the end checking your grammar. So there's a few things about this I want to say. First step up, make sure you know what the question is asking. This is a big deal for a lot of people. They'll not really understand the question and end up answering just the wrong question and losing points because of that. So do make sure that you understand what the question is asking you to do. If it's asking you to analyze something, examine something, argue something, take a position, debate with a quote, there's like all kinds of things. So make sure you really look for key words like analyze, debate, describe, stuff like that, so that you know what you're actually supposed to be doing in this essay. Brainstorm is the next step, and don't take too long doing this because it's easy to get sucked into both of these first two points, all of them. Really try to save time for the writing portion. So you want to put down, you can do a listing. You can do some speed writing if you think that that'll help you. You can do the sort of clustering where you had the circle with the lines that come off of it to try to kind of jog your memory about stuff. If you have a quote, you might go ahead and decide to write that quote down as soon as you get the test, to get it out of your mind so you don't forget it. But you can write the quote down and maybe make some notes about what you might say about the quote if you had took the time to memorize one, or if you memorized one that's relevant to the question. Then you're going to create the 5-paragraph outline. With the next step, and you want to give yourself only a little bit of time to do this, and it doesn't have to be really detailed. Think of it as working with your brainstorming on the scrap paper, because you're going to look at them back and forth. But just do the 5-paragraph outline where at the beginning you tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you use however many middle paragraphs. We call it the 5-paragraph because originally there were like 3 paragraphs in the middle, but maybe you have more points than that. So figure out what you're going to talk about for your 3 main ideas, 3 or 4 main ideas maybe, and then have a conclusion where you talk about tell them what you told them thing. So look at the question while you're writing this and see if there are key words that you can use to help guide how you're making this outline. When you write the actual test, remember to skip lines if you are allowed. You usually are. This will make it easier for the teacher to read, so many people's crummy handwriting in a row, because it's kind of hard to read someone's cramped handwriting. If it's skipping lines, you're giving lots of space for the eye to rove, and you're also giving yourself room to make corrections at the end, because you do not want to have to rewrite the entire paper. That's a huge waste of time. You want to maximize your writing time. Write in ink. You can use an erasable pen usually. If you have sweaty hands, don't use pencil. It becomes a mess very quickly. I usually use the same kind of pen and paper because the pen ink absorbs really quickly. So there's my tip on what paper to use. Thick paper. Don't use anything that's like a crazy different grammar rule at this time. If you've never successfully used a semicolon, this is not the time to experiment with that. Stick with what you already know, and then you won't worry about having making some wild mistake in your essay exam. And then if you're going to misspell a word, because it happens to the best of us, you get in the middle of a test and you can't remember how to spell Tchaikovsky or whatever, just misspell it consistently. If you try to spell it differently every time, hoping one of the times you'll get it right, you're likely eventually that the instructor or the person grading it will notice and be like, what else did this person mess up? And then they'll go back through your paper and find every mistake you made. So just consistently spell it the way that you think it's the best guess you have. But again, there's a chance if you go back through the test and skim it real quick, you might find that word in another question. So always remember to do that. After you get done writing it all out, getting your ideas organized into your 5 paragraphs, and you had an outline, so you were in a really good position, you can take a few minutes at the end to check your grammar. And again, these are my these are how I would break it up. I don't need that much time for checking grammar. I would probably even use less time than this, just enough time to reread it depending on how long it is. But if you know that you tend to not write perfect sentences, give yourself more time to check the grammar and do the writing in less time if you can. Try to optimize this donut, I guess, for your own needs as a writer. If you read the question one day and you think, oh my goodness, this is the best question in the whole world, and you're just like ready to go, just write down like a little bit of this brainstorming and 5-paragraph outline and then just get going if you definitely know what you're going to say. That can also be a thing that happens. So when you go back and check your grammar, you can use the skipped lines to add information that suddenly occurs to you, or to correct words. And misspelled words. If you make a mistake, if there was something that you're like, oh, I spelled that word wrong, unless it was like, I don't know, like a swear word or something, you don't need to like black it out like this. Like I've seen people do this a lot, where they like get into this like thing that changes the weight of the piece of paper. I actually had a student once draw flowers out of the top of a box like this. You don't need to do that. Just a couple lines, like this will make it clear to the teacher that you want that to be an ignored word. A little bit thicker than that if you like, but don't go crazy. That's a waste of time and ink, and don't do it. So if you do see that you want to include additional information or include a new word or something, maybe you missed a word, just use a caret, this little arrow, and you can do it pointing up or pointing down to show where the information should go. So that is my collection of tips for taking an in-class essay exam, and I will let you know that I did end up getting the highest score in the class on my final for that Shakespeare class, and I did end up passing it with an A, which was, kind of a miracle in my opinion still. But I knew in advance what I was going to use as my introduction. I thought about that in advance. So it's helpful if you can have an idea of a comparison you want to make or a story that might work, a very quick like anecdote that's definitely related to the topic at hand. Those are the kinds of things that can work as like a really catchy introduction. Also, I like the word invariably at the beginning of an essay exam. A lot of people don't use that word, so it might be worth it to see if you can sneak invariably in there if it's relevant to what you're talking about. So good luck with all of your essay taking, and have a nice final exam week.